Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Cornwell. I'm a senior at Emory University, and this is for Comms 345, The Art of Persuasion. I'm giving this speech today to advocate my position that a majority of readers of news today are too trusting in what they consider to be an accurate source. I also stand firmly behind the fact that there are several news publications out there, such as the New York Times, that have lost their credibility due to a series of rampant plagiarisms and should be carefully evaluated before being trusted by the average user. Today, whenever I log on Facebook, I see a lot of articles reposted by people from unofficial news sources. A lot of them, people are just deceived into thinking that something is true that is not. This is an incredibly relevant topic today, especially given certain issues that are raging in our world, such as wars overseas and Ebola. It's just very good to have a certain criteria that you use to evaluate your news sources before you determine whether it's fact, fiction, or biased, and before you share it with your friends and say you know that something is happening. So how do you know that what you're reading is the truth? What criteria do you use to evaluate your news and determine whether it's true information? Do you get news sources, do you check them through a variety of sources, or do you simply just believe the first thing you read if it sounds interesting? My purpose today in giving this speech is to encourage you all to develop a set of criteria, if you do not already have them, to evaluate these, to decipher what is true, what is not, and what is biased. My hope for you all is that after this, you will be more discerning in what you consider news and be able to determine what is true and what is false. The first incident that I'll be talking about, the first major publication that I mentioned earlier is the New York Times. Many of you have probably heard of the New York Times. It's one of the most biggest news sources in the world. It was founded in 1851. It is referred to as the Gray Lady. It's one of the oldest newspapers in the world. It is owned by the Sulzberger family, and its motto is all the news that's fit to print. When the New York Times went online in 1996, it changed its motto for its website to all the news that's fit to click. The issue in question for the New York Times began in 2003. A young reporter named Jason Blair began working at the publication in 1998. He said he graduated from the University of Maryland, and he was an up-and-coming African-American reporter. The newsroom, especially newspapers, is predominantly dominated by white males, and so the New York Times was happy to have a chance to have an up-and-coming reporter who had a lot of talent that wasn't an African-American. However, in his time with the New York Times, he had a lot of issues. He had a lot of problems with printing correct news. He made a lot of spelling mistakes. He even spelled the owner's name wrong in one particular article. And all of this, he had a very poor lifestyle. And the New York Times, while he was working there, they gave repeated warnings about his dangerous news reporting style. And one editor even emailed the head chief saying that we have to stop Jason from writing in the New York Times now. However, because he was an African-American reporter, the New York Times allowed him to keep reporting and gave him second chances, as they would have several other individuals. Jason Blair's controversy came to light in 2003 when the Washington sniper incident happened. Most of you are probably too young to remember, but it was an incident where there were 6 attacks in Washington, and Jason Blair was one of the 6 people sent on the news team to report on it. However, the editors of the certain situation were not notified that Jason Blair was a dangerous reporter and had issues with making up details. He actually wrote a story about the sniper incident that landed on the front page of the New York Times. It was only after this that, because it was such a major story that he published, that his poor methods came to light. The fact that he had made up several scenes in the story, he had fibbed quotations, and he had just made up ridiculous facts about the story. He said that he had been places they hadn't, and he misquoted sources that he had never even talked to. The New York Times was humiliated in this incident when it came to light, as they were one of the largest publications, and to be guilty of such a rampant act of plagiarism reflected very poorly on them. After diving into research on Jason Blair, the New York Times found out that he had issues with 36 of his 73 national articles that he had wrote about. And after further investigation into Jason Blair, it was found that numerous sources in the New York Times warned the higher-ups in the paper that he was a problem, yet they refused to do anything about it. This issue has continued to affect the New York Times credibility even today, and people still have an issue trusting them. And I'm not saying that you should necessarily distrust the New York Times, but even the most major publications have issues and deserve to be critically evaluated. Another incident with the New York Times came this past year when their head editor, their first female head editor, Jill Abramson, was fired for reportedly hiring a lawyer to assess the wage gap between her and her previous male predecessor. The New York Times has ran over 90 stories about equal pay for men and women in the past 3 years. The New York Times denied this and said it was because of her pushy leadership style, which just erupted into a he said, she said debate between the New York Times and Abramson. Several news sources found this disheartening that the New York Times would be guilty of such a thing, and especially given the fact that Abramson won the publication over 8 Pulitzer Prize winners, or won the publication 8 Pulitzer Prizes in 3 years. And if we can't trust what the New York Times is saying about what's happening inside, how can we trust them with what they're saying is going on outside in the outside world? Another issue that I think a lot of users, Facebook users in general, struggle with today is they see satirical articles on the internet and they're widely circulated, and people tend to believe them. One of the major sources of these articles is The Onion News. The Onion is a satirical news organization who takes real people, real events, and seemingly mundane activities and puts a humorous spin on them in an attempt to just circulate news. Several major media sources have been fooled by stories that The Onion put out. In 2002, The Onion ran a story that the senators in Washington were threatened to leave Washington if the Capitol was not redesigned with a retractable dome. A major news source in Beijing picked this story up and ran it on their evening news, despite the fact that it was obviously not true. Another article that was widely circulated by The Onion was Harry Potter. When it came out, it was huge. The Onion ran a piece that said that it was inciting children to practice witchcraft. This led to a widely circulated article that was used as evidence for Harry Potter books recruiting children to Satanism, which is just simply not true at all. Another issue, another article that I saw that was quite humorous, in 2012, a lot of people on Facebook were re-sharing this article that Samsung had paid a $1 billion fine in Apple with nickels, saying that Apple had not declared the legal tender that they were to pay the bill in, and they simply did it as a joke. This is obviously a ludicrous story, as it would take, they said 30 trucks arrived with nickels. It would take over 735 18-wheel trailer trucks to deliver $1 billion worth of nickels. And this just goes to show that a lot of readers today, especially young readers, need to be more discerning in what they read and determine as true. So the best way to get news is from a variety of sources, and I'd just like to encourage you all that critically evaluate what you're reading on Facebook, what your friends post, to determine whether it's true or not before you share that particular article, and just developing a strict criteria before you determine what's true and what is not. And that will be all. Thank you.